Good morning everyone, Anthony Violi from AV Weather Forecast with another video blog. Okay, you remember a couple of weeks ago we went through sea surface temperatures and I was showing everyone the current anomaly situation and what to expect. I thought I'd go back a couple of years and show everybody our Super La Nina from 2010. Now we're remembering, of course, that the Southern Oscillation, the ENSO cycle, peaks around Christmas time, between Christmas and early January, and then sort of builds up between April and September. So this was Boxing Day 2010 when we had the Super La Nina. You can see the blue and purple and pink being very cold water right through most of the Pacific Ocean here. This is a very strong global phenomenon when this occurs, and this affects our weather globally right across the world. Now, as you can see, all the cold water's here, so what it actually does is it stacks all the warm water here near Australia. That's why in a La Nina we get a lot of rainfall, because what actually occurs is the very strong trade winds coming out of South America in this direction here, they just continually pump out of the east, means that all this warmer than normal water has got plenty of moisture with it, and that also pumps all that moisture down into the country here. And the Indian Ocean is always quite warm at this time of year as well, so that pumps warm moisture from the Indian Ocean down into the country. And of course it's like a funnel effect. You get from this side and you get from this side, and then you get lots of rainfall because all the troughs that sit over the country for most of the summer are just injected, basically full of humidity, which produces record rainfall or very, very large amounts of rainfall in a strong La Nina. Now that was 2 years ago, and we actually had a La Nina last year as well. Normally in a cold PDO, which is a cold cycle of the Pacific, which goes for a couple of decades. I'll touch more on that in another video down the track. La Ninas last 2 years or 21 months on average. So this was a 2-year event. This was the first year, and then we had another follow-up one next year. Now I got some correspondence recently about people asking me, when I produced my seasonal forecast in July, I was forecasting that there would be no El Nino. As we know, climate models and the Bureau of Meteorology and a lot of other people were forecasting an El Nino. This is a situation as it stands in July when I made my forecast. Now, if you look at the Pacific, you can see this warmer than normal water around South America coming into there's the equator there, so it's sort of just lining up along the equator, just a lot more warmer than normal water. But what people don't realise is you've got all this extremely cold water here, which is left over from the previous 2 years of the La Nina, and I call this part here the PDO signature, the cold PDO signature, or the La Nina signature. Now what actually happens in this situation is there's a north equatorial current which runs out of the Bering Sea here and then down the coast of Canada, North America, and then does a bit of a right hand turn here and sort of comes to this sort of point just northwest of Solomon Islands, and then goes in the undercurrents and goes back under there to South America and then comes up again. So while you're seeing a bit of warming here, my opinion was that this was just a response, because we had 2 years of much colder than normal water sitting there. So the normal response when the La Nina is finished, which is around about Easter time, is for it to be a warming. It's basically just a relaxing of the system, and it's just, let's get back to normal. Let's put some warm water in here. The trade's slacking off a little bit, the trade winds that is. So we start to see a little bit of warming, which is a normal thing to expect when you have 2 years of very cold water there. So that was my reckoning there. And then when you look at the subsurface temperatures, there was no support to suggest there was going to be any more build-up of heat to create an El Nino here. And that's why I was thinking this cold water here will soon feed down through here and then cool all this off, and basically there'll be no El Nino. And that's exactly what happened. Let's go forward now from July to November, and you can see here much less heating here in this area, quite a bit of cooling, cold here, sort of a mixed bag really, not too much happening. So you can see this is nowhere near as cold, which means that it all fed under here and then came back up in South America and just cooled it off. I should also add, when you have an El Nino developing, it's basically a reversal of this whole pattern. If we go back to this area here, the La Nina, this is really strong easterly winds coming along the South American coast, just pushing this way through the Pacific. and it's because of the very strong easterly winds that it pulls up cold water from this area here down the coast of South America. Just rips up some cold water. They call that cold upwelling. In an El Nino, the whole pattern changes, and you need the warm water to stack up here and come in the undercurrents. So if I go back to here, so it's got to stack up here and bring warm water underneath to come out again in South America. They call them Kelvin waves. Well, there was none of that really happening. There was a couple of minor ones, but nothing enough to suggest that we're going to see anything like this El Nino, which is why I forecast that it wouldn't happen, and gladly it didn't, and we sort of had this neutral pattern set up. So this was about a month ago, and again, it's looking like a really mixed bag here. Nothing major to see. Yeah, real mixed sort of bag, and a bit of heat, bit of cool. Nothing too major to write home about. But then when we look at today's, we can see this much cooler all of a sudden because the trade winds are strengthened and it's bringing up this cold water. Now again, there is not enough cold water here in this area to suggest that this is going to be a pattern that's going to go cold and stay cold like a La Nina would, because it just doesn't have the support here. We need really cold water in the undercurrents here to be able to feed into the basin and bring up cold water. There is cold water in the subsurface, but there's nowhere near enough to get a strong La Nina. So all we're going to see this year, and it's going to peak in the next month, is probably just a cool neutral, which would be probably a little bit more cooler than warm. I mean, there's warm spots along the equator and a few warm spots here and a bit in here and a bit in here. So it's going to be a mixed bag, and so that's basically my forecast of the cool neutral coming off. And the good thing about the cool neutral is it's still like a weak La Nina pattern. So the pattern is normal. The southeasterly and easterly winds pushing this way towards Australia. So that means that this warm spot here is going to end up somewhere around here in the next few weeks to a month, which again, with the easterly winds, is going to produce a lot of moisture over the country and produce a fair bit of rainfall over the summer. One thing to note though is that because we're in a neutral pattern, global temperatures are pretty much average, or slightly above average. When you get this sort of thing happening of the La Nina, this drops global temperatures markedly, and you really notice it in the mid-levels between the 700 and 400 millibar level, what we call the mid-levels. It drops the global temperatures markedly. So what it means is any troughs that are sitting over the continents are really invigorated and strong because there's so much cold air aloft. So what happens is when you get all this moisture feeding in, the cold air in the mid layers activates these troughs severely, and we get record-breaking rainfall that we've seen over the last 2 years. At the moment, when we look at today's one, we basically have just average temperatures. So even though the troughs will be decent, they will not be this flooding rains that we saw 2 years ago, unless we get an unprecedented system line us up. But at this stage it's looking like a wet summer, but nothing extraordinary at this stage. And again, I'm still forecasting a La Nina for 2013-14 again, and obviously there's a lot more to play out, so we'll see how that goes. That's about it for this broadcast. Now I'm just going to point out that if you want any more information, you can go to my weather forum, which is called the Real World Weather Forum, and you can find me at www.therealworldweatherforum.com, or you can find me on Facebook under Anthony Violi, obviously. And if you've got any other questions or suggestions, or you want to learn about the weather, feel free to message me on any of those forums or Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, and I'll be more than happy to do a video presentation for you. Until next time, I'll speak to you then.